Her hands were trembling violently as the empty white cup clattered against the floor. Dark, scalding steam rose from the lap of the man sitting in front of her. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, panic written on every inch of her face. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had just dumped boiling hot coffee on the most dangerous man in the city. The room went dead silent. Forks lowered. Conversations cut off instantly. Every single eye in the Obsidian Lounge turned to watch. But the man she had spilled on was no ordinary customer. He was Desmond Volkov, the ruthless head of the Black Dragon Syndicate. And what he did next, no one in that room, especially the waitress, would ever forget. Stay with me until the end, because this story twists in a way you will never see coming. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video to support the channel. Hit subscribe and comment "coffee" down below if you're watching from home. Now, let's get into it. It is a humid Friday night in the city's most exclusive district. The Obsidian Lounge was dimly lit, smelling of old money, polished wood, and fear. The restaurant buzzed with the usual crowd of elites, politicians, CEOs, and the underworld figures who controlled them. This wasn't just a place to eat. This was neutral ground. But everyone knew who really owned the air they were breathing. Desmond Volkov sat at his reserved table in the back, a statue carved from ice and arrogance. He was a handsome man, with slicked-back dark hair and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He wore a high-end black suit, his white shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal the glint of a gold chain. At only 28, he ruled the Ryong syndicate with absolute discipline. His eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the room. His enforcers sat at tables nearby, pretending to eat, but their hands never strayed far from their jackets. In Desmond's world, you didn't make mistakes, you didn't show weakness, and you certainly didn't interrupt his peace. The night was proceeding exactly as Desmond preferred, quiet, expensive, and controlled, but that control was a fragile illusion. Tiana Roxy was moving through the dining room like a ghost in a machine. Tiana was exhausted. Her classic black and white uniform felt heavy, her feet ached, and her mind was miles away, worrying about her brother's medical bills. She was invisible to these people, just a pair of hands serving drinks. She adjusted her white apron, wiping sweat from her brow, trying to keep her composure. She hurried toward table 4 with a fresh pot of coffee, her movements frantic, her focus slipping for just a fraction of a second. She didn't see the shoe of a patron sticking out into the aisle. She tripped. Gravity took over. The white porcelain cup flew from her tray. Time seemed to slow down as the dark, steaming liquid arced through the air. It didn't hit the floor. It splashed directly onto the pristine trousers of Desmond Volkov. Tiana froze, her hands held out helplessly, her eyes wide with sheer horror. She looked like a deer staring into the headlights of a semi-truck. The background chatter died instantly. The enforcers half rose from their seats. But Desmond didn't jump up. He didn't shout. He simply sat there, the hot coffee soaking into his suit, and slowly, terrifyingly, he looked up to meet her eyes. To understand the silence that would soon suffocate the room, you first have to understand the noise. The Obsidian Lounge wasn't just a restaurant, it was a fortress draped in velvet and gold. For Desmond Volkov, it was a throne room. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, watching the light catch the heavy gold ring on his finger. A single drop of this whiskey cost more than most people made in a week. To anyone else, this was paradise. To Desmond, it was just another Tuesday. He sat with his back to the wall, a habit learned from years of surviving assassination attempts. At 28, he had everything: the Italian suits, the Swiss watches, the fear of every rival gang in the city. But looking around the dining room, Desmond felt nothing but a crushing, heavy boredom. It was the curse of the king. When you have absolute control, life loses its flavor. He checked his watch. 8:14 p.m. Right on schedule, a man in a gray suit approached the table. This was Park, a mid-level distributor who had been skimming off the top. Park was sweating profusely, his eyes darting to the enforcers standing like statues in the shadows. He started babbling excuses, talking fast about supply chain issues and delayed shipments to explain the missing money. Desmond didn't blink. He didn't even look at the man. He simply continued to stare at the ice melting in his glass. In the world of the Black Dragon, you didn't pay with money, you paid with loyalty, and Park was bankrupt. Desmond finally raised his eyes. They were cold, empty, void of any human empathy. He didn't scream, he didn't flip the table, he simply tapped his index finger on the white tablecloth. Once. Two men materialized from the gloom, grabbing Park by the arms. The distributor opened his mouth to beg, but a heavy hand clamped over it instantly. There was no scene, no screaming, just the soft scuffle of expensive shoes on the carpet as Park was dragged out the back exit, destined for a conversation that wouldn't involve words. The jazz music didn't stop. The other patrons, sensing the violence but too terrified to witness it, kept their eyes glued to their plates. Desmond smoothed his silk tie, his pulse steady, his expression unchanged. This was his reality: absolute power, absolute brutality. And yet, he felt hollow. He picked up his menu, scanning it for the 100th time, desperate for something, anything unpredictable to happen. He had no idea that the chaos he was craving was about to walk right up to his table, holding a steaming pot of coffee. The coffee dripped from the hem of the jacket onto the expensive rug, counting down the seconds like a ticking bomb. Tiana couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She just watched the steam rise from the lap of a man known for burying his enemies in concrete. She squeezed her eyes shut, her body bracing for the strike, for the shout, for the bullet. But the blow never came. Desmond Volkov stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, a sound that made 3 waiters flinch. He looked down at the ruin of his $3,000 suit, his face a mask of terrifying indifference. He didn't scream, he didn't demand an apology. He simply reached into his inner pocket. The movement caused his bodyguards to step forward, hands on their holsters, ready to end her. But Desmond raised a single hand to stop them. He pulled out a crisp white handkerchief, dabbed the stain once, and dropped it onto the table. Then he placed a stack of $100 bills beside the wet cloth, payment for a meal he hadn't touched. Without a word, he turned and walked out, his entourage flowing behind him like a dark river. The heavy front door clicked shut, and the spell broke. "You idiot!" The scream tore through the room. It wasn't Desmond, it was the restaurant manager, Mr. Vance. He was sprinting across the dining room, his face pale and slick with sweat. In his mind, the silence wasn't mercy, it was a delay. He was convinced that the Black Dragon would return to burn the establishment to the ground because of this girl's clumsiness. Vance grabbed Tiana by the arm, his fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to bruise. He didn't care about the customers watching anymore. Panic had stripped away his professionalism. He dragged her through the swinging double doors into the kitchen, the heat and noise of the cooks hitting her like a wall. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Vance hissed, shoving her toward the back exit. "That was Volkov. You didn't just ruin a suit, you put a target on this entire building." I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident. I can fix," Tiana stammered, tears finally spilling over. "Fix it? You can't fix dead." Vance snatched the white apron from her waist, untying it so violently the strings snapped. "You're fired. Get out." "Please," she begged, grabbing the doorframe. "I need this job, my brother." "I don't care about your brother," Vance shouted, shoving her out into the cold, garbage-strewn alleyway. "And don't think you can just go down the street to the bistro. I'm calling every owner in the district. By morning, you won't be able to get a job washing dishes in a dive bar. You are blacklisted. Do you hear me? You're done in this city." The heavy steel door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the empty alley. Tiana stood alone in the dark, the smell of rotting food filling her nose, shivering not from the cold, but from the realization that her life had just shattered along with that porcelain cup. The walk home was a blur of neon lights and wet asphalt. Tiana didn't feel the cold wind biting through her thin uniform. She was too numb to shiver. The transition from the Obsidian Lounge to her neighborhood was stark. The manicured hedges and luxury cars vanished, replaced by overflowing dumpsters, flickering street lamps, and the distant wail of sirens. She unlocked the 3 heavy deadbolts on her apartment door, a necessity in this part of the city, and slipped inside. The smell hit her instantly, a sterile mix of rubbing alcohol and damp plaster. It was the smell of sickness. "Tiana?" A weak voice drifted from the corner of the studio apartment. Her heart clenched. She forced a smile onto her face, wiping the rain and tears from her cheeks before turning around. "Hey, Leo, go back to sleep. It's late." Her younger brother lay in the single bed pushed against the wall, his frame so thin he barely made a dent in the mattress. The rhythmic hiss-click of the portable oxygen concentrator filled the room, a machine that cost more to rent per month than their rent. Leo's chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. He was fighting a battle his body was losing, and the only thing keeping him in the fight was the expensive medication lined up in amber bottles on the nightstand. Tiana walked to the small kitchen table and emptied her pockets. $7.42. That was it. That was everything. She stared at the meager pile of coins, her breath hitching in her throat. The severance pay Vance had denied her wasn't just extra cash, it was the payment for next week's oxygen tank. Without the job at the Obsidian, there was no money for the refill. And without the refill, Leo wouldn't last 3 days. Her phone buzzed against the table, the vibration sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. Tiana flinched, staring at the screen. Sender, Snake Choi. Message, Tuesday is coming. Have the envelope ready, or we take it out in trade. A wave of nausea rolled over her. Snake Choi wasn't a bank, he was a shark who operated out of a basement gambling den. He didn't send overdue notices, he sent enforcers with baseball bats. She had borrowed $5,000 to pay for Leo's emergency surgery last winter, and the interest was drowning her. Every shift, every tip, every extra hour had gone to keeping the wolf from the door. But now she had nothing. She looked back at Leo, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his lifeline had just been cut. Vance hadn't just fired her. By taking away her income and blacklisting her name, he had signed her brother's death warrant. She sank into the rickety chair, burying her face in her hands as the terrifying reality set in. She was trapped between a monster in a suit who had fired her and a monster in the streets who was coming to collect. 2 days later, the Obsidian Lounge was operating with its usual robotic efficiency. The air smelled of truffle oil and old money, the low hum of conversation acting as white noise for the city's elite. Desmond Volkoff walked through the heavy oak doors at exactly 8 p.m. The host stiffened, bowing low enough to inspect his own shoes, and led the Dragon of the East to his corner table. Desmond sat, adjusting his cufflinks, his eyes automatically scanning the room. It was a reflex, a survival mechanism honed by years of gang warfare. He noted the exits, the new faces, and the staff. The waiters moved in synchronized patterns, silent and invisible. But one face was missing, the girl with the terrified eyes, the one who had dumped scalding coffee on a suit worth more than her annual salary. He hadn't thought about her since he walked out that night, but her absence was a break in the pattern, and Desmond hated broken patterns. "Mr. Volkoff?" The voice was oily and eager. It was Vance, the manager, scurrying over with a bottle of Desmond's preferred vintage. His hands were shaking slightly as he poured the wine, desperate to curry favor. "I trust everything is to your satisfaction tonight, sir?" Vance asked, his smile tight and nervous. "We've taken extra precautions. The staff has been re-educated." Desmond swirled the wine, watching the red liquid coat the glass. He didn't answer. Emboldened by the silence, Vance leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And regarding the disturbance on Tuesday, I wanted to personally assure you that the situation was handled. The girl, Tiana, was terminated immediately. I made a few calls, ensured she's blacklisted from every reputable establishment in the district. You won't have to suffer her incompetence ever again." Vance straightened up, puffing out his chest, waiting for a nod of approval, perhaps even a tip. He expected gratitude for crushing a cockroach. Instead, the temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Desmond set his glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood was soft, but in the sudden silence between them, it sounded like a gavel strike. He slowly turned his head, locking eyes with the manager. "Handled?" Desmond repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Yes, sir, removed. Gone." "I left a $5,000 tip on that table, Vance," Desmond said, his tone devoid of emotion yet heavy with threat. "Do you think I pay people I want punished?" Vance's smile faltered, then vanished entirely. I thought, for your honor, sir." "My honor?" Desmond stood up, towering over the smaller man. The dining room went quiet again, sensing the shift in the air. "You assumed my will. You assumed that because a girl made a mistake, I wanted her life destroyed. You took it upon yourself to act as my executioner." Desmond stepped closer, invading Vance's personal space, until the manager was trembling against the table. "I decide who eats and who starves in this city, not you." Desmond buttoned his jacket, his appetite gone. "Find her. Now." "Kenji." Desmond didn't even look at his second-in-command as the heavy doors of the obsidian lounge swung shut behind them. The night air was thick with impending rain. "Find the girl." Kenji, a man of few words and lethal efficiency, simply nodded as he opened the rear door of the black sedan. "The waitress?" "Yes," Desmond said, sliding into the leather interior. "And find out why a manager who sweats when I look at him felt brave enough to fire her in my name." It took the Black Dragon Syndicate exactly 42 minutes to locate one desperate woman in a city of 4 million people. The network was faster than the police and far more accurate. "She's in Sector 4, boss," Kenji said, glancing at the rearview mirror. "Outside a pawn shop on 9th. It looks bad." Sector 4 was the kind of place where the streetlights were shot out to hide the drug deals. Desmond watched the city decay through the tinted glass as they crossed the bridge. The luxury high-rises faded into crumbling brick tenements. Tiana was standing on the corner, shivering violently. She was clutching a small velvet bag to her chest, her grandmother's locket, the last thing of value she owned. The pawnbroker had laughed at her, offering $20 for the gold. It wasn't enough for the oxygen. It wasn't enough for the rent. It wasn't even enough to buy a bus ticket out of hell. She wiped the rain from her eyes, turning to leave, when two shadows detached themselves from the wall of the liquor store. "Well, well," a voice rasped, It was Marco, one of Snake Choi's bottom feeders. He wore a cheap leather jacket that squeaked when he moved. Look who's out past her bedtime. Tiana stepped back, her heel catching on a crack in the pavement. I don't have it yet, Marco. Please, I just need 2 more days. Snake don't like waiting, sweetheart, the second man sneered, stepping closer. He reached out, grabbing the strap of her purse. Let's see what you got in the bag. Maybe we take a down payment in trade. Tiana screamed, tugging back, but she was exhausted and weak from hunger. Marco laughed, a cruel, ugly sound that echoed in the empty street. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully until she dropped the velvet bag. Please, she sobbed, the fight draining out of her. Don't hurt me. Hurt you? Marco grinned, flashing a gold tooth. We're just getting started. They were so focused on their prey that they didn't hear the low, powerful purr of a 12-cylinder engine rolling up to the curb. They didn't notice the sleek black car that looked like a shark swimming through dark water, and they certainly didn't see the rear door open and the polished dress shoe that stepped out onto the wet asphalt. The polished leather heel hit the puddle with a sound that somehow silenced the wind. Marco didn't notice. He was too busy twisting Tiana's wrist, enjoying the way she gasped in pain. He raised a hand to strike her, a reflex born of cruelty and cheap whiskey. But the hand never landed. A grip like iron clamped around Marco's wrist. It wasn't a struggle, it was a full stop. Marco spun around, a curse ready on his lips, but the words died in his throat. Standing there, amidst the rotting garbage and flickering neon of Sector 4, was a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine shoot. Desmond Volkov wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than the entire block. The rain beaded on the fine wool, refusing to soak in. He didn't look like he belonged in this alley. He looked like a god visiting hell. I believe, Desmond said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Tiana's chest. She asked you to stop. The visual dissonance was blinding. On one side, Marco, greasy, desperate, wearing a stained jacket. On the other, Desmond, immaculate, sharp, terrifyingly calm. Tiana slumped against the brick wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps, unable to process the hallucination in front of her. The man she had humiliated was now standing between her and a beating. Walk away, rich boy, Marco sneered, trying to yank his hand free. He failed. Desmond's grip didn't waver. This ain't your side of town. You don't know who we work for. I know exactly who you work for, Desmond replied, his eyes dark and empty. You work for a snake, and snakes get crushed. With a sickening crunch, Desmond twisted. Marco howled, dropping to his knees as his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. The second goon lunged forward, pulling a switchblade. Tiana screamed a warning, but Desmond didn't even turn his head. He simply sidestepped, a movement so fluid it looked like a dance step, and drove his elbow back into the attacker's throat. The man collapsed, gagging, the knife clattering into the gutter. It was over in 3 seconds, violence executed with the precision of a surgeon. Desmond adjusted his cufflink, checking for dirt. Finding none, he turned his back on the groaning men and looked at Tiana. He didn't see the clumsy waitress anymore. He saw the bruises on her arm. He saw the terror in her eyes. And for the first time in years, the cold block of ice in his chest began to crack. Get in the car, he said, offering her a hand that was steady as a rock. You're done with this life. The safe house wasn't a home. It was a glass cage floating in the sky. 40 floors up, the city lights looked like distant embers, far removed from the grime of Sector 4. Tiana sat on the edge of a white leather sofa that probably cost more than her brother's entire course of treatment. She was still shivering, her hands clutching a mug of hot tea that Kenji had silently placed in front of her. Desmond didn't sit. He paced by the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection ghostly against the night skyline. He had removed his jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt, a rare sign of informality. Tell me, he said, His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the massive, empty room. Who were they? Tiana looked down at the steam rising from her cup. They work for a man named Choi. Snake Choi. Desmond stopped pacing. He turned slowly, his expression darkening. He knew the name. Everyone in the underworld knew Snake Choi. He was a bottom feeder, a parasite who made his money bleeding dry the desperate and the dying in the slums. He was a stain on the city that Desmond had simply ignored, until now. And why, Desmond asked, his eyes narrowing, is a waitress from the Obsidian Lounge entangled with a sewer rat like Choi? My brother, Tiana whispered, the words catching in her throat. He has cystic fibrosis. The surgery was $40,000. I didn't have the credit. Choi was the only one who would lend it to me. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and fierce. I was paying him back, every week, until Mr. Vance fired me. The silence that followed was heavy. Desmond looked at the bruise forming on her wrist. He thought about the $5,000 he had left on the table, a fortune to her, but pocket change to him. He had intended that money to be a fresh start. Instead, because of his manager's incompetence and Choi's greed, she had been hunted like an animal. A cold, hard rage settled in his chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was a weak emotion. This was something sharper. It was pride. He had spared her. In his world, when the dragon showed mercy, it was a decree. It meant she was off limits. By touching her, by threatening her, Snake Choi wasn't just collecting a debt. He was insulting Desmond Volkov. He was spitting on the only act of kindness Desmond had performed in years. Desmond walked over to the table and picked up his phone. He didn't look at Tiana, but his next words were a promise carved in stone. You don't owe him anything anymore. But the contract, Tiana started, panic rising again. He'll kill Leo. He won't kill anyone, Desmond said, dialing a number, because by sunrise, Snake Choi won't exist. The Golden Viper wasn't a lounge. It was a hole in the ground filled with smoke, shouting, and the clack of mahjong tiles. It was the kind of place where sweat stained the walls and hope went to die. Snake Choi sat at the center table, his feet propped up on a stack of dirty bills, laughing as one of his thugs recounted the beating of a shopkeeper. Then the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs groaned open. It wasn't a raid. There were no sirens, no shouting police officers. It was just one man. Desmond Volkov descended the concrete steps, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the grit. The contrast was violent. In a room full of stained tank tops and cheap tracksuits, Desmond looked like a shark swimming through a sewer. The noise in the room died, table by table. The laughter choked off, the music cut. Snake Choi looked up, his grin fading into a sneer of confusion. He didn't recognize the face immediately, but he recognized the aura. The air in the basement suddenly felt very thin. "You're lost, suit," Choi barked, though his hand drifted toward the Glock tucked in his waistband. "Private club." Desmond didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of Choi's table. He didn't look at the 20 armed men surrounding him. He looked only at the ledger open on the table. "Tiana Roxy," Desmond said, his voice cutting through the silence like a razor blade. "Her debt is cancelled." Choi blinked, then threw his head back and laughed. It was a nervous, jagged sound. "Cancelled? You think you can walk in here and give orders? Do you know who I am? I know you are a parasite, and I know that if you don't hand over that ledger in 5 seconds, you will be a memory." The room erupted. 3 of Choi's men lunged forward, confident in their numbers. It was a fatal miscalculation. Desmond didn't retreat. He stepped into the space. He moved with a speed that blurred the air, grabbing the first thug's arm and using him as a human shield against the second. Bones snapped. A scream echoed off the concrete walls. Before Choi could even unholster his weapon, Desmond had kicked the table over, sending chips and money flying, and pinned Choi's hand to the armrest of his chair. "I am the Black Dragon," Desmond whispered, leaning in close enough for Choi to smell the expensive cologne masking the scent of violence. The realization hit Choi like a physical blow. His face went gray. He wasn't dealing with a rival, he was dealing with the king of the city. The men around them froze, weapons lowered, terror replacing their bravado. No one wanted to be the man who shot at Volkov. "The ledger," Desmond repeated, tightening his grip until Choi whimpered, "Now." The doors of the Obsidian Lounge swung open, but this time Tiana Roxy didn't enter through the kitchen. She wasn't wearing the black and white uniform that smelled of dish soap and anxiety. She was wearing a midnight blue dress that caught the light with every step, her hand resting lightly on the arm of Desmond Volkov. The effect on the room was immediate. The low hum of conversation didn't just die, it evaporated. Waiters froze mid-step. The host at the podium looked like he had seen a ghost, but no one was more terrified than Mr. Vance. The manager scurried over, his usual oily smile replaced by a look of sheer panic. He stopped 5 feet away, his eyes darting between the Black Dragon and the woman he had thrown into the alley like garbage just days before. "Mr. Volkov," Vance stammered, wringing his hands. I don't understand. This woman, she is banned. I assured you she would never step foot in here again." Desmond didn't stop walking until they reached his table, the corner table, the throne. He pulled out the chair for Tiana, waiting until she was seated before turning his gaze to the sweating manager. "You're right, Vance," Desmond said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "You did ban her. You also insulted her. You threatened her livelihood because you thought it would please me. I was only protecting the reputation of the establishment," Vance pleaded, looking around for support that wasn't there. "The establishment?" Desmond reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded document. He tossed it onto the crisp white tablecloth. "I bought the building this morning, Vance. I own the land. I own the wine cellar. I own the very air you are wasting." Vance's jaw dropped. "And as the new owner," Desmond continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "I'm making some staffing changes. Get out." "Sir?" "You're fired," Desmond said, mirroring the manager's cruelty from 3 nights ago. "And don't bother asking for a reference. You're blacklisted." Vance stood there, paralyzed, until 2 of Desmond's enforcers stepped out of the shadows. The manager didn't need to be told twice. He fled toward the exit, stripped of his power, leaving Tiana to watch him disappear into the night, the same way she had. The tension in the room broke. The music returned, softer this time. A waiter, trembling slightly, placed a silver coffee service on the table. He reached for the pot, but Tiana raised a hand. "I've got it," she said softly. Desmond watched her. For a heartbeat, the memory of the scalding spill hung between them, the fear, the chaos, the ruin. But Tiana's hand was steady. She lifted the white porcelain pot and poured the dark, steaming liquid into Desmond's cup. Not a single drop was spilled. She slid the cup toward him, and for the first time the dragon smiled. It wasn't a cold smile, it was the smile of a man who had finally found the one thing money couldn't buy. "Perfect," he said.